I want to wish a very special happy birthday to a dear friend. So, Therese, I wish you a most happy birthday and grant you 3 wishes to wish by the powers vested in me, which means I'm powerful enough to lift a 50-pound bag of dog food on a good day. But seriously, I do wish you a very happy birthday and many more. And if I could wish a wish for you, I would do so. We're now in September, and the schools around the nation are opening for the new school year. We're seeing fall themes in the stores along with Halloween decorations. For all intents and purposes, it's fall. Whether or not we've had our equinox yet, we're still waiting for our economic recovery that was predicted to have occurred months ago. And we have more whispers and rumors about what is really going on with our politics and economy than any one person can count. All of this leads to plenty of fuel for conspiracy theories. Sorting the wheat from the chaff is hard in the best of times. In the worst of times, it may not even be possible to sort it all out. In the meantime, we have an opportunity tonight to talk with one of the most respected writers on the topic in America about the conspiracies, rumors, and whispers that we've all been hearing about, and get his take on it all. So please, everyone, welcome Jim Marrs to the Dawn of Shades tonight. Jim, can you hear me?
I can, Jen. It's great to be with you.
Oh, it's always great to have you on the show. So there's so many topics that we could cover tonight. And always when you come on the show with us, we run out of time before we get to everything that we wanted to talk about. One of the things that recently came across my desk, and which I sent you the link about, was I had gotten a email linking me to a page on Above Top Secret about a microchip that was supposedly going to be required in order to give people access to the National Health Care Plan. And then today I got another one saying, well, that was taken out of the bill. So nobody knows what's really going on. Have you heard anything about it?
Well, the scary thing about the microchip is they've got those little babies so small now that they can be injected into you with a hypodermic needle, okay? Now, this, of course, leads some of the more conspiracy-minded to say, well, wait a minute, is that why they're pushing these swine flu vaccinations? Because buried in that mix of vaccine could be a chip. So, I mean, it's not like the technology does not exist, because it does exist. The question is, are they doing that? And the answer is, who knows? We don't even know for sure what's all in those vaccinations. We know there's squalene, and we know that there's a bunch of other bad stuff. And besides that, if you know anything at all about vaccinations, you'll know that first and foremost, what it does is give you a little bit of whatever it is they're inoculating you against. In this case, swine flu. So they're going to give you a little bit of swine flu, and the hopes that your immunization system will overcome it and realize I can take care of this. And then when you get the swine flu germ, you will have an immunization to it. But isn't it interesting that they call it the swine flu vaccine? They don't call it the anti-swine flu vaccine, and that's the reason, because what they're doing is giving you the swine flu. And that, of course, leads to all kinds of problems, because if your immunization system is, up to speed, operating at peak efficiency, then you probably don't need the vaccine anyway, because it probably could overcome the influenza strain. But the problem is, of course, all of our immunization systems have been compromised by any number of things, including chemtrails, and including not enough oxygen in the air, and including the stuff that's in the food we eat, and things like aspartame that's in any kind of most artificial sweetened drinks, all kinds of things like that. It's really pretty amazing, and I guess the vaccination issue for me, there's two important things. Number one, if every health authority in the world, including doctors and nurses and scientists, pharmaceutical makers and everybody connected with that, if they were unanimous saying we have a problem and the solution is to take this vaccination, then, I'd probably be the first one in line. Sure, let me have some of that. But the problem is that's not the case. Anybody who goes and surfs the Internet, anybody that listens to alternative media and not the corporate-controlled 5 multinational corporations that determine everything that the mass media presents, and I'm not just talking news, I'm talking books, magazines, cable, satellite, CDs, music, films, movies, TV, radio, even billboards, then you would know that there's tremendous controversy among the health authorities in the world with eminently qualified people saying, hey, this could be dangerous, we don't know what it's going to do, could lead to Guillain-Barré disease like the swine flu of 76 did, and that's a good object lesson. In 76, we were told, you got to take the swine flu and vaccination. Even President Gerald Ford was on television saying, yeah, I got mine. And everybody went and took it, and there were less deaths and disabilities from the swine flu than from the vaccination. Of course, they've gotten smart now. Here a few months ago, the head of the health department, Kathleen Sebelius, signed off on some memorandums that absolves the pharmaceutical corporations from any kind of liability if you get sick or have some kind of terrible reaction to the vaccination. So there's another concern. If it doesn't work for you, in fact causes you a big problem, who can you turn to? And the answer is nobody, because they've been given immunity. The second thing that really concerns me is in Massachusetts they have a state law that's creeping along through their state legislature there that says if you don't take the vaccination, you can be arrested, that they can force you to take the vaccination. Now, I don't know about your listeners, Gia, but for me, I can't think of a more classic example of total and absolute loss of freedom if the individual doesn't have the right to decide for him or herself what somebody's going to inject into their body.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty fundamental invasion, I guess.
Yeah, pretty fundamental.
Yeah, it literally, it is an invasion.
Absolutely.
And if you don't choose to get it, that's really a violation of your personal rights. And, you think about these microchips. I've helped inject, I don't know how many dogs with microchips. It's a common way to positively identify a dog. It's no big deal. We do it with a hypodermic needle, and just boom, and it's injected as easily as any other vaccination. It is a slightly thicker needle, but I'm sure that the dog microchips are not top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art stuff. It's, about half the size of a grain of rice.
Right, if not smaller.
Well, the ones using on the dog are about half the size of a grain of rice, and that's still pretty small. If it's something truly state-of-the-art, I'm sure it's much smaller than that.
Well, this grain of rice chip, that's at least 10 years old.
Well, it's
really amazing.
I for maybe 15 years with that microchip.
Yeah.
So quite a while. And nothing's changed with them.
I'm sure you've seen, we're just in big trouble here, and nobody's paying attention because the mass media, of course, keeps us engulfed in this electromagnetic matrix, and they tell us this is the way the world is, and most people are still buying into that. It's really not. You may have seen the video of the man who simply had a picture of one of these pictures of Obama with the Joker face, from Batman. And he was at a town hall meeting in Virginia at a school, and Officer Wesley Cheeks Jr. told him he has to put his sign down. he said, but wait a minute, I'm just holding the sign. And he said, you put the sign down or I'm going to arrest you for trespassing. He said, trespassing on public property, you know. The guy says, put your sign down. And he says, but what about the First Amendment? He said, didn't you swear an oath to the Constitution? And Officer Cheeks says, yes, I did. He said, but I have a job to do. You put that sign down or I'm going to arrest you and take you away. And the guy says, well, you know, well, this used to be America. And Officer Wesley Cheeks says, well, it ain't anymore. Hello, folks. Hello. Wake up. Smell the coffee. We're in deep doo-doo here.
Yeah, you know, the whole thing, this town hall thing, it used to be the First Amendment, you know, the right to free speech. It was a big deal. But we're seeing that right to free speech being narrowed down, you know, to you really don't have the right to speak out against certain things.
Well, apparently today, freedom of speech belongs to whoever agrees with you. If you don't agree, you don't have it. And you know what? Let's face it, this didn't start under Obama, did it?
No,
this goes
been
all the way
going on
back.
for a while.
It's been going on for a long while, but it really got big time under the Republican Bush administration, where they would have rallies and they would keep anybody that wasn't wearing a Republican badge out. In fact, there were people arrested, dragged off, put into free speech areas, you know. I know back in the election of 2004, I met a fella who was telling me about his travails trying to demonstrate at the Republican National Convention, and how they had taken him and way down the street, put him behind some fencing and some barbed wire, and said he had to stay in the free speech zone. Obviously, he was very agitated and he was irate. And I just looked at him and I said, well, how fortunate you are. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you were in the free speech zone. If you were in the free speech zone, where does that leave us out here? We're not in the free speech zone. And he started laughing. But it's true. Where is the free speech zone? You know? Is it the United States of America, our homeland, or is it in some barbed wire containment area that some political party or politician decides you can have free speech? This is getting ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is, and you know, this business with the health care, you know, it's like they say all this. The recent example was that Obama said something that basically made it sound like the association, AARP, was supporting the health care bill that he was pushing. And, you know, they weren't. They hadn't endorsed it. And, you know, then everybody's up in arms over that, and they have these town hall meetings, and, you know, they're talking about people being violent, and they were going to stop the town hall meetings, and, you know, and then they started restricting who could go to them. Well, what's the point of having a town hall meeting if it's just going to be a bunch of people sitting around saying, yeah, you're doing a good job, I agree with you 100%, not
yeah, we don't need that.
No,
What's really interesting is that since the first of the year, and people begin to kind of wake up from their enthrallment that they got swept into because of a very well-mounted, well-funded, well-produced campaign about change. They, at a lot of these town hall meetings, and after Congress adjourned and they came back home, a lot of those guys and gals were, you know, they were got huffy, would storm out of the meeting. Some of them got chased down the street. People are getting fed up, and they better get the message. Although it may be too late, because it's pretty obvious that Congress, for whatever reason, and we could go into that, but they're just, they have no power. They're just paralyzed. They can't exert themselves. They can't stand up for what they know is right. They won't stand up for what their constituents tell them is necessary. I mean, you know, here we are, we're broke as a nation. Obviously, now what happens, Gia, in your family, or my family, and everybody's listening, what happens when we're broke? The first thing we do is cut expenses, okay?
Yeah.
That $125 cable bill, that's great, but we can't afford that. We're going to cut back to the $50 basics, okay? We can't afford that $200 phone bill, so we're going to cut back on our telephone calls. Might even let that cell phone go for a while. We got to stop driving down to the corner convenience store just to get some milk. We need to cut down our driving so we can cut down our gasoline expenses. We cut our expenses. And yet, look at Congress. Look at Washington. We're dead broke, and all they can do in the way of a fix is to spend more money. You drive the debt up ever higher. It's amazing. These banks that whose liabilities outweigh their assets, excuse me, they're already being called zombie banks because they're dead and don't know it. They're still going through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you consider us as a nation, depending on who you listen to, we owe between $10 and $15 trillion. And yet it's been estimated that if every man, woman, and child in the country was to liquidate every asset they have, we could only come up with about $7 trillion. So, hey, we're a zombie nation. We're just kind of going through the motions.
I'm looking at all these stimulus packages that went out. Now, I don't know about your personal economic situation, but
by the way, I hadn't got my check yet. How about you?
No.
You can get one?
I'm not getting economically stimulated here.
I could use a little stimulus. See, that's another thing. I'm not buying
a new car. They have this cash for clunkers thing. Okay, sounds wonderful. Right. You have to be able to afford to go buy a new car, though.
Well,
not a newer car, a new car.
And if you go there and look at that carefully, if you enroll in the government Cash for Clunkers program, you have to sign up for their program. And when you sign up for their program, buried in the fine print, it says that the U.S. government now owns everything in your computer and everything you have.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, you know what? It turns your computer into an extension of the federal government. And blah,
right.
blah,
Well, it says so in there. That was on Glenn Beck, I believe, and they pointed out and showed the clause where it says they have the right to come into your computer, look through your files, get all your bank records, get all your financial records, basically just they own everything you have.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I think I'll keep my clunker.
Yeah, well, my clunker I don't think qualified because it had mileage requirements and this, that, and the other requirements, and mine really isn't that bad.
I know.
Yeah, but you look at that. Well, the people who could afford to go buy a car anyhow. Really, did they need that much economic stimulus?
No, the whole thing's just ass backwards.
It's
for example, they've given out all these trillions of dollars, and most of it we don't even know where it went to. What I love is something like $12 trillion of our tax money the Fed sent to foreign banks, and then had the arrogance to tell Congress, well, no, that's proprietary information. We can't tell you where it went, who got it, what it was used for, or what kind of collateral we got in return. That's just insane. That's insane. And then the stimulus package, what was it, $700 billion? Do you realize that if they, instead of giving all that money to the very bankers who caused the problem in the first place, if they had instead put them on trial for fraud, and it was fraud, because they made all these bad loans knowing they were bad loans because the money was being made not on the loans but on selling packages of these loans as derivatives. Okay? So instead of putting them on trial for fraud, they gave them the $700 billion. Why didn't they just simply apportion out that $700 billion to every registered taxpayer? Everybody paid taxes last year, gets their share of it. Well, now everybody in the country's got to sudden little windfall of money they'd use to pay down their credit cards, pay them off, pay up their student loans, pay off their mortgages. Hey, and the whole country would be better off, and we'd all be back to work, and the economy would be booming. And, of course, they'd have to handle all this. Once you got your check, you cash it through your local bank, and you'd put it in your bank account, and so the banks would be making money. Everybody would be happy and making money. But, gee, I guess that just makes too much sense. We can't do that. We got to give that $700 billion to the very bankers that caused the trouble.
Exactly. And, the car industry, okay, I believe in buying American when you can and whatnot, but by not allowing for by not forcing them to compete on the open market, that got them in the situation they were in. They were making garbage cars for years, okay? And everybody knows they were.
Well, all you got to do is look back. Everyone who thinks that Obama's socialist programs are the way to get this country back on its feet and going along, I would simply ask them to go back and look at every other endeavor that the United States has gotten involved in. I guess the one we're most familiar with is U.S. Postal System, okay? And God knows they do a good job. And I want to tell you, the people I know down here at my little local post office, they're great folks, okay? But the Postal Service is broke, okay? And they can't even deliver to the same efficiency as private companies like UPS or FedEx, okay? So the government basically has not had done a very good job there. Plus stamps, which, I can remember when a stamp was like 5 cents, now what is it, 45 cents? And we don't have better service for that. Okay, what about Amtrak? Oh, here's a case where we've got tracks owned by private corporations, but the passenger service is run by the government, and it's a mess. It's a fiasco. It does not.
Well, I tried to arrange for my mother to go from Arizona to New Orleans on the train. Now she is in bad health, and she uses oxygen, so she needed power for an oxygen condenser.
Mm-hmm.
And after spending 2 weeks on the phone with various people trying to arrange the logistics, they finally concluded that they could not guarantee that she would have oxygen during her trip, which was going to take like 5 days. You could take a Greyhound bus quicker than that.
It's just abysmal. And my point is that at the point in these services, and where it breaks down is when the government gets involved. If you have private companies competing with each other, what we used to call free enterprise, but it's got to be free, okay? It can't be dominated by one corporation that runs the rest of them out of business, okay? If you have free enterprise, well then, the passenger train company that wants to, your mother's not the only person that has to have oxygen. I see people like that out all the time, so there's got to be, a million of them in the country, maybe more. And so the company that wants to be competitive would make sure that she can be accommodated, and that way they get that piece of the business. But when it's privately owned tracks and publicly owned government-run business, it just doesn't work. Does not work. Things fall apart. It doesn't happen.
Well, you look at just on the train system alone. Look at the American train system. It's horrible. Okay, well, as far as mass transit goes, you either drive or if you want to go from East Coast to the West Coast, any major distance. If you want to get there, there's 2 ways to get there. You can fly or you can drive. You only take a bus if you have absolutely no other alternative. And by the way, it's not much cheaper than flying. And
it takes,
the other,
3 times as long.
Yeah, and the train is 2-3 times as expensive as flying. Takes way more time, and you're real limited on where you can go. Okay, why? Europe has a great train system. People use the train system there all the time.
Right.
We have the tracks. What's wrong with us?
Well, that's because, let's say the subway system in Chicago or in New York, those are basically trains, right?
Right.
And they operate pretty well from what I can tell. Most people in New York, they even pretty well-heeled people, they take the subways because it's a inexpensive and fast way to get around. But those are owned by the city and they're locally operated. The problem with Amtrak is that they don't own the tracks. The tracks are owned by the private train companies who have no interest whatsoever in hauling passengers because you have to feed them and give them water and take care of them and provide oxygen to them and all this stuff. And they don't really want that. All they want to do is haul freight, and so they don't keep the tracks up that well. But these are the same tracks that Amtrak has to run on, which is operated by the government, who has no say-so over the condition of the tracks, and that's why you're always hearing about mishaps and wrecks and things like this. It's just it's a halfway way of trying to do business. It doesn't make it. And we need to understand this because we need to get away from this idea that government is the answer. Government is not the answer. Government is the problem. If local people take care of things, here's an example. I don't even live in a town, but I used to belong to the Optimist Club down in a little town here near where I live, about 1,600 people. And they had a little problem, a very slight problem, of some of the teenagers hanging out on the town square, okay? Well, they didn't have any place to go, right? So there was a piece of property down by this creek, and every time we had a heavy flooding rain, this property would flood, so it was floodplain. Nobody really wanted to build on it anyway. Couldn't, because it'd get flooded out every time there's a heavy rain, so they went to the owners and they said, would you donate that property for a park? And they said, yeah, we would. Take the tax write-off. Then they went to the city and said, if we got this park, as a park, would you maintain it? And they said, yeah, I think we can handle maintaining it. So then all of us in this Optimist Club, we got down there on a few weekends and we mowed the place down and we landscaped it a little bit. We put up some barriers, for parking and put up a sign that said Optimist Park. And it's still there today. And plus, some of the members donated some playground equipment. One guy was a welder, and he made a little merry-go-round type thing. And so now, in this little town, there's a beautiful little park, and it really didn't cost anybody much of anything. And the city, it doesn't take them a whole lot to just see that it's mowed and picked up now and then by city workers. They'd be doing it anyway. And, hey, wow, that's how you take care of things, okay? Now, of course, if we were in Dallas or San Francisco or Los Angeles or New Orleans, we'd have to go to the zoning board, and they would want to have a feasibility study for $75,000, and then we'd have, and 5 years later, you still wouldn't have a park, and if you did, it would cost upwards to $1 million. It's just, we just got to start doing things different. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I think government, someplace there was a quote I recently saw, something to the effect of, when the people no longer inspire fear in the government, but the government inspires fear in the people, maybe you better look at the government.
No, it's basically, I think that line is, when the government fears the people, you have freedom. When people fear the government, you have tyranny.
Yep, you got it right there.
It's very true. Why should we fear the government? Well, gee, you got to fear the government because IRS will come take everything you have. Well, but why would they do that? Well, because you either didn't file your taxes or they didn't like what you put down for your taxes. Yeah, but I thought the taxes were voluntary. Well, they are, but if you don't, they can fine you and jail you. Well, then it's not voluntary. Oh no, yeah, but it is voluntary. Oh, but wait a minute. How do they know what your taxes are? Well, your 1040 form. Well, what if you don't file a 1040 form? Well, then they get you for non-filing. Well, what if you do file it? Well, then they use that against you in the tax court. Well, wait a minute. Fifth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States clearly states that you cannot be compelled to give evidence against yourself. The mafia bosses have used this to great effect for years. I respectfully decline to answer the question on my Fifth Amendment rights. Okay? So, wait a minute, what about our Fifth Amendment rights? If you don't file the 1040 form, they come get you. If you do file it and they don't like it, they come get you. You are being compelled to give evidence against yourself. It's that simple.
And then, you know, okay, if the IRS doesn't get you, well, we've got this lovely little thing, you know, called Homeland Security. And when you're, you know, by some vague interpretation, you're declared to be a threat to public safety or a terrorist, well, boom.
Exactly. And how did we get that anyway? Okay, well, let's go back and look at this, all right? J. Edgar Hoover, who we now know had plenty of problems, plenty of faults, and yet he steadfastly opposed his entire career any national police force. And I think the reason for that was not so much that he was looking out for everybody's freedom, but for the fact that he didn't want any competition with the FBI. And in fact, he was basically lobbying that if there was going to be a national police force, he wanted it to be his FBI. But he never got to see that, okay? What we got to see was post 9/11, we saw Homeland Security created during the Bush administration. And slowly but surely, Homeland Security has now come to pretty much have taken over, dominated, and mostly through paying out money, now controls virtually every police department in this country. Even down here in little rural Texas, they get millions of dollars from Homeland Security. Of course, when you take the money, you have to do what they say. Okay? And now what has this done? Well, let's go back and look in history. When Adolf Hitler took control in Germany, first thing he did was set up a Homeland Security. And he put Heinrich Himmler in charge of it, and slowly but surely they gained control over all the police agencies in Germany. And it became known as the Gestapo, the secret state police. Now, today, we've got our own version of the Gestapo. And of course, you know, it's not quite to the extent of the Gestapo in Nazi Germany, but the groundwork's all there, and the structure is all.
Well, you know, I have to admit, okay, years ago when Homeland Security was first, you know, suddenly in the headlines, you know, I kind of did a double take because it was so reminiscent of Hitler's Germany.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Homeland bit. You know, I was like, ooh, when's Fatherland coming up? You know,
exactly.
And yeah, you know, it was kind of eerie.
Well, and the thing is, then, if you think that's eerie, let's go back and figure out why was Homeland Security created in the first place as a response to 9/11. We were attacked on September 11th, 2001. Or were we? Okay? Right now, we have, in a peer-reviewed scientific publication in Europe, they have found in every instance of World Trade Center debris that they have tested, they have found military-grade explosive known as thermite, which is a nanotechnology thermite, which is a steel-cutting chemical used in building explosions. Now, why haven't we heard about that? The news media is deafeningly quiet about that whole story. Because if those buildings were blown down, then it wasn't 19 Muslim fanatics with little bitty box cutters and box blades. It was something much deeper and stronger. And since this nanotechnology thermite is only available to the U.S. military, then here is the proof that 9/11 was an inside job. Now, what's that got to do with Nazi Germany? Because in 1933, the beginning in January, Germany was a democratic republic, the Weimar Republic. Hitler was only the vice president, or he was chancellor, kind of like vice president. And then in February, their parliament building, the Reichstag, was gutted by fire. And Hitler said, it's communist terrorists that did this. Give me the power so I can put an end to this and protect you. So they rushed through the Enabling Act, which set up a system for national identification cards, confiscated guns, and set up a detention centers, which quickly grew into the concentration camp system. And, whoa, is that beginning to sound familiar? We had 9/11, and then we got the Patriot Act, And then John Ashcroft was even, at that time, Attorney General, was actually talking in terms of creating concentration camps. And it's just, we're just cycling right back through history, and nobody knows this because nobody knows history.
Yeah, and I have to say that history, when it's presented to you as a child in junior high and high school, is boring.
Yep.
Because they just make you memorize things. They don't tell you why any of this happened.
Exactly.
And it's not presented as a coherent story. It's just dates to memorize and, various acts to remember and battles. And it's boring, dry stuff. But when history is presented to you as a coherent story, with reasons things happen, it's way more interesting.
And haven't you found, Gia, that as you get older and you suddenly find out, you start reading the story of Antony and Cleopatra, or Napoleon and Josephine, or with the story behind how Hitler came to power, or some of the wild tales of the royalty in England. I mean, it's exciting stuff. It's even better than some of the sci-fi crazy stuff. In fact, I love this definition. The difference between fiction and reality.
Huh.
Well, fiction has to make sense.
Yes, it's true.
If I turn in a story of 9/11 and the problems with it, the fact that out of those 19 hijackers, 7 of them are still alive in the Middle East, and 7 of them were not even the people they've identified, and yet they won't change their identification. If I talked about how all 3 buildings went down, and only 2 were hit by airplanes, and they dropped into their own foundations, it's at free fall speed or close to it, that there was evidence of explosions and of thermite being used, et cetera, and I wrote all that up as a Hollywood script, they'd throw me out of the office. They'd say, oh man, this doesn't even make any sense. I said, nobody's going to buy this, and yet that's what really happened. That's the difference. I have
a friend that has done a packet on his research on the 9/11 events, because he's firmly convinced that it was an inside job, as you said. And, when he first finished it, he tried to get people to listen to him.
Don't even want to listen.
No. He was labeled a nut.
Well, and let me tell you something. See, I've lived through that too. For about 15 years after the John F. Kennedy assassination in Dallas, it was just considered impolite to bring that subject up in decent company. You didn't want to talk about it. People only whispered about it amongst themselves, but you weren't supposed to even talk about it. And we're going through that same period right now about 9/11. Now, at some point in the future, sooner or later, all of a sudden, it's going to be acceptable to talk about it, and at that point, the dam's going to break, because there is so much more verifiable, documented evidence about proving that 9/11 was an inside job than we ever got about the Kennedy assassination, and yet here we are about 43, 44 years later, and the polls show that virtually everybody, about 85, 90% of the population now, believes, understands, accepts that Kennedy was killed as the result of a big conspiracy, probably centered at the highest levels of the U.S. government. Now, we all know that, okay? Now, of course, I keep getting people to come up to me and say, will we ever know the truth? And I try to patiently explain to them, you're not asking the right question. And the truth, we know the truth right now. If you'd read the books that are out there, not 1 or 2, but all of them, if you'd look at all the evidence and then think for yourself, you'll know exactly what happened to Kennedy. What you're really asking is, will the government ever hold a press conference and say, okay, here's what really happened? The answer to that is no. They're never going to do that. But you can know the truth of a lot of things. You just have to study it out for yourself and think for yourself instead of just listening to the talking heads in the corporate mass media.
Yeah, well, maybe I have an advantage. I own a TV. It hasn't been on in almost 2 years now.
Well, there's your advantage. You're that's why you're thinking about things.
It does kind of put me out of touch with a lot of popular culture. And yeah, there's some great TV shows that I'm missing, okay? And I'll admit I'm missing. But you remember when you were talking about, when you're broke, you cut back on things? I don't see any reason to pay $80 a month for cable that I watch maybe an hour to a week of. That just didn't make any economic sense to me. So therefore, I just do without it entirely. And so anything I get off the internet, and because of my connection speed, I really prefer not to get it in video form. So I like everything in text. And so I look at, and you read it, and it's a different kind of perception when you're reading it instead of being shown that 30-second soundbite.
Right. And my story is that I live out here in an unincorporated area. I just live out in the wilds of rural Texas, and I never could get cable. I'd try to go get cable, and they'd say at $20,000 a mile. Who you think we're going to bring you cable? So I didn't ever have. I couldn't get cable, and then finally I can remember when they finally got those satellite dishes small enough, and they got them perfected enough to where I got to the point where I could afford a little satellite dish, and so I got that, and I was so ecstatic, man. And now, other than the 4 channels I was getting out of Dallas-Fort Worth by broadcast, now I had 150 channels. Wow! And then I'll never forget how deflated I was when I sat down and would surf through those 150 channels and realized there wasn't anything on any one of them that was really worth wasting my time watching. And you know what I'm saying, Gia, because, yes, you might be missing an occasional decent program, okay?
Well, I like documentaries, and I like things like, nature programs.
Right. And those are
programs.
Nice. Yeah, and you may miss one of those or two. Yeah. But as far as actually missing out on what's happening in the world, you haven't missed out a thing, have you? You know everything that's important.
Well, until somebody makes a reference to a movie or TV program, and I'm totally at a loss. I have no reference to it. I haven't watched TV consistently since the 70s. So, it's going to have to be a real old TV program now.
Well, what I'm saying is, when 9/11 happened, you knew about it, right? You didn't miss anything.
I knew about it. No, I knew about it within a minute.
Of course. We live in the electronic age. So, hey, folks, give it a try. Turn off your television for about 2 weeks, and you're going to find out 2 things. Number one, you're not going to miss out on anything except a bunch of distracting and pablum programming. And number 2, you're going to start thinking. You're going to start thinking about things, and you might be able to start dragging yourself out of this matrix that we're all in.
Something, I really, I watch people, and, I really wonder about the world that we live in. There's all this talk about various things are going to happen, and 4/5 of the population are going to be wiped out. 4/5 of the population, that's 80%. And I'm looking around, and 80% of these people don't have a clue.
Well, they probably will be the ones who get wiped out because they won't have sense enough to stockpile a little bit of extra food or some water, or they won't have an evacuation plan to get out of town if they have to. They'll be, when they decide they got to get out of town, their gas tank will be empty and they won't be able to go get gasoline. And so I guess the people who are prepared in one way or another, and I'm not talking about being a survivalist or anything, no, but it only makes sense. Well, of course, I live in what they call Tornado Alley, so we got the threat of tornadoes. New Orleans, okay? You guys, as we well know now, you got flooding and hurricanes to worry about.
Right.
So it's always only prudent to think ahead a little bit and make preparations for some sort of emergency.
And I've discovered, too, that, preparations for emergency is more than having a stockpile of food and weaponry.
Right. It's just having a plan.
It's your head, being able to adapt to a problem.
Right. Exactly. For one thing, I've already figured out with my luck, you know, when the balloon goes up, I'll be in an airplane going to New York or something. You know, I won't be able to get anywhere, and anything I've got stockpiled won't do me any good anyway. So, you know. But it only makes sense to just think about these things and be prepared like everybody's listening right now. You know, stop and think. If you suddenly had to get out of wherever you live and go somewhere else, do you know, number one, where you would go? If you know where you go, do you know how to get there? And if the major highways were blocked up or closed off, do you know alternate routes? I mean, it's just prudent thinking, you know, just planning a little.
Well, I got a news flash for you, Jim. If they block off the major highways here in New Orleans and you want to get out, you better swim.
You better have a boat handy, right? Really, better have a pirogue.
Yeah, something like that. And I have to admit, I saw my first alligator in the wild this weekend.
Oh, boy. Was it a big one or a little one?
It was a little one.
Oh, good. Good.
It was a little one, and I was in the car, and it was no threat to me, but I had, you know, that was kind of like, whoa, they really are out there. Yeah, I've only lived in New Orleans for 6 years, so, yeah, it was my first wild alligator. I was out camping for the weekend.
Did you hear about the two Cajun boys sitting there dangling their feet in the bayou, and one of them says, "Hey, Boudreaux," he said, "the alligator, she came and she bit off my leg." And he says, "Oh, Gaston." He said, "Which one?" He says, "Oh, Boudreaux, say, you seen one alligator, you seen them all."
Yeah. Yeah, we did have a boy last year who got his arm bit off swimming in a little lake that had an alligator over at Slidell. And the boys that were swimming, they knew that big alligator was out there. And they'd been swimming, I guess, for a couple of years with the alligator. One day he was hungry, and he was lucky.
Yeah, they finally hit him on a day he was hungry.
Well, he only took the boy's arm, and you and I both know that's usually not what happens.
I know. Actually, so I'm taking it that the kid survived.
Yes, he did.
Well, he was very, very fortunate.
Now, they went and got the gator, and they got the kid's arm out of the gator, but it had been in the gator too long to reattach it.
Couldn't make that work.
No.
Well, you know, now, see, in today's politically correct abomination that we're living in, we should outlaw alligators, because actually here we've had some deaths, and we've had now this dismemberment of this young boy. We've got to save the children. We've got to just outlaw alligators.
Well, see, I'm a desert rat, so I regard alligators as pretty much sea monsters, so I would probably get on that train. But you know what? We have already come up on time for the first break. So,
all right.
Folks, stay tuned, and the Dawn of Shades will be right back with more Jim Marrs.
Our stories and columns as doorways to transporting you.
I'm your host, Gia Scott, and I'd like to remind everyone to visit our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. Sign up for the newsletter, wander around, explore it, let me know what you think of it. There are also links there to take you to blogs, Twitter, and even Facebook. If you have a question that you wish to have asked, you can email it to me at giascott@gmail.com. I'm monitoring the email during the program with Jim Marrs tonight, so I'll try real hard not to miss anything. Also, there's even a page up there for Jim, so if you want to know about his stuff, you can go check that out. Jim, before we start talking and forget, could you give the information about your books and your website for the audience?
Well, okay. My website is, strangely enough, JimMarrs.com. JIMMARRS. There's 2 R's in Mars. .com. And there you will find access to all my books. Of course, they're available at any bookstore. If they don't have it on the shelf, they get one quick enough. And, of course, Amazon is always a good one to go find it. And I guess if you're interested in the Kennedy assassination, you might want to check out my New York Times bestseller Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy. It was one of the books that was the basis for the Oliver Stone movie JFK. If you want to know about the Army's remote viewing program, you might want to check out my book, Psy-Spies, PSI Spies, Psychic Spies. If you want to continue on and find out even weirder things, because every single remote viewer was trained by the U.S. Army and by the government. They all, some of them will talk about it freely and some of them won't, but they all had direct knowledge of the reality of UFOs. So if you want to know, if you've ever had a question about, well, what about UFOs? Is there really anything to all that? Then check out my book, Alien Agenda. I've been told it's the top-selling nonfiction book on UFOs in the world. It's been translated into about a dozen languages. That book, of course, led to the question about, well, then who speaks for Earth? Who is who's in control here on this planet? That then goes to my book, Rule by Secrecy. Who is secretly trying to rule and manipulate and control us? And that tracks the secret societies, identifies who they are, where they came from, what they're up to. And then that led to a book about what really happened on 9/11, and it places not only deals with the attacks of 9/11, but places it into a broader context so you can understand what, why, and how that happened. That's called the Terra Conspiracy. And then to bring things from Rule by Secrecy a little more up to date, you might want to read The Rise of the Fourth Reich, about how that National Socialism, in the German language, the acronym is Nazi, and how these Nazis were brought to this country, thousands of them after the war, rolled into our military-industrial complex, rocket scientists, mind control experts, chemists, biological warfare experts, and how that they have slowly but surely bought their way, using the loot of Europe, into positions of control in our country, and this is what has turned the Republic of the United States into the new American empire. In German, the word empire is Reich, so we're a new Reich. And then, if you want just a little smattering of all the best conspiracy theories, I have a book out called Above Top Secret, and it deals with about 20 of some of the more prevalent conspiracy theories. Who killed Kennedy, what crashed at Roswell, what's going to happen in 2012. My favorite chapter is the one on Is God an Alien? That was kind of interesting to look into. And just various things like that. So that it's a good primer to start off with if you have friends and or relatives that are pretty skeptical that anything's going on other than what they see on CNN or Fox. You might want to give them a copy of Above Top Secret, and maybe it'll jumpstart their thinking processes.
Could be. Now, there's a sneaky rumor that you're about to have another book come out.
Yes, actually, I think in November. I've tried my hand for the first time at writing a novel, and it's called Sisterhood of the Rose. And it's about a secret society of women who get together and help win World War II for the Allies. And I think almost everybody, whether you're interested in history, World War II, women's rights, secret societies, the balancing of the male-female energy, what happened to Solomon's treasure, what's going on with the white powder of gold, and what's the deal with the crystal skulls. It's all in there, and I think I think most people find it a good rollicking read. And actually, I'm calling it a work of faction, fact-based fiction. It's a lot of truth rolled into a story. I finally figured out that seems to be the thing that gets people. Dan Brown, the author, when he was had a trial over in England. Was sued for plagiarism, talking about the Knights Templars and the genealogy of Jesus and all like that. He actually testified that he had read my book, Rule by Secrecy, before he wrote his book, the Da Vinci Code. And, of course, the Da Vinci Code was written as a novel. And yet it stirred controversy all over the world and made millions and millions of dollars. And so I said, oh, well, I see. Instead of spending years researching and heavily documenting and footnoting, maybe I need to just write a novel and tell people what's going on. So I'm trying my hand at that.
I think you'll do an excellent job at it. For one thing, you are a natural, gifted storyteller.
Oh, well, that can cut both ways.
Well,
remember we had an adage back in the newspaper game said, never let the facts stand in the way of a good story.
Yeah. Well, leave that one alone.
Well, it is. Well, though, it is kind of tricky, though, to try to stick to a factual story and yet do it in a way that's entertaining and attention-grabbing. It's pretty tricky.
Yeah, I worked for a time doing edutainment, and that can be kind of a gray area.
Yeah, it gets a little murky. But, Hollywood has done this successfully for just decades. They'll take a truthful story, and then they'll massage it a little bit, and then come out with a rollicking good movie. And I don't know, I'm a little ambivalent towards it. I'm still trying to stick to my journalistic guns and try to stick with the facts and things that are documented or at least well attributed. And yet, on the other hand, I can certainly appreciate that there's probably more people learning truth from movies today than they are off of well-documented but dry books.
Well, the thing is, you think about the best teachers in your past. They were good teachers because they brought the factual material to life.
Yes. And stimulated our interest.
Yeah, they made it come to life, and they did so by telling a good story. Like last weekend, I was talking to one of the rangers at the park that we were at, and he was one of the actors in some, there again, I was kind of at a loss, but in some movie that he did about the Alamo. And he was telling us
was it the recent one with Billy Bob Thornton?
I don't have a clue.
Probably so.
They lived for 2 weeks, like the people did in the area.
Right.
At that time period before, and they also did a documentary at the same time for the state of Texas about the Alamo, where they were interviewed in character. And he was talking about being at this reenactment place, which was some site that John Wayne had used for filming movies.
Oh, Happy Shahan's Ranch.
Got me again.
Down South Texas. Well, I know about that, Gia, because some years ago I participated in a battle reenactment of the Alamo at the Happy Shahan Ranch. And it was incredible because it was in March. It was on the same day, I think, March the 6th. It was overcast. It was almost drizzly a little bit, which is exactly what the weather was on the day of the final attack at the Alamo. And it was pretty spooky because we got invited down there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play a Texan. I had to be part of the Mexican Army, but it was really wild because we, climbing up homemade ladders and climbing over the walls and seeing the facade of the Alamo and the smoke hanging in the air and all the noise and clashing and shooting and everything. It was kind of spooky. It's like going in a time machine.
Yeah, he played a character by the last name of Lightfoot, who was one of the people in the Alamo. And, after he was finished, he said they lived that way. They ate the same food. They stayed there the whole bit. He said when the battle started and everything, the sound of the guns, and he talked about that. And he said the strange thing was, all the other actors, all he knew them by was the name of the character that they played.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know what their name was. So, you went through, you studied the character before you went, and you knew everything about him and what happened with him and everything. He said after it was all over with, he went to the real Alamo. And he said it was kind of strange because he's standing there and he's reading the stuff. And he's thinking back to the reenactment, and
there's all his buddies. There's all his buddies listed there.
And he said he actually felt himself getting angry. These people are walking around like nothing happened, and totally oblivious, and all his buddies died. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and he said it was kind of strange, you know, but history had really come to life for him.
Well, people really do need to understand their history because since I am kind of a lay historian, I don't claim to have any great, special knowledge or insights, but I do study a lot. And it's really amazing that the people who founded this country and fought in the Revolutionary War, I mean, they put it all on the line. They put their lives, they put their fortunes, they put their homes, put their families, they put it all on the line to fight for their freedom. And the guys that died at the Alamo was the same thing. There was a point there way before the final battle when they pretty well knew they weren't going to get out of there, okay? Now, they could have crawled away. They could have given up and said, okay, we'll just be prisoners of war. They could have done all of that, but they chose to stand there and go down fighting because they truly believed in freedom and liberty, okay? And today, freedom and liberty is slowly but surely being sucked out of us, and nobody can even seems to get worked up enough to, just only a handful of people are willing to go out and hold up a sign or go work for a true candidate.
You ask the average person to stand up for anything that they believe in, and you're going to hear 101 excuses.
Right.
Nobody wants to put anything at risk. I think about it, people look at me like I'm nuts because, I've been chasing the rainbow of what I believe in my entire life. Now, what do I have to show for it? Absolutely nothing.
No, that's not exactly true. I venture to say, Gia, that you can get up in the morning and you can look at yourself squarely in the mirror and you can take pride in the fact that you are you and you stand for what you believe in and you haven't caved into anything different.
Yeah, and then, you go through bad days when other people measure you by their measuring stick and you discover that, by their measuring stick, you have been designated an utter failure because you have nothing to show for all this work that you've put in. And, they don't, so many people do not understand that not everything that you work a lifetime for is going to have tangible, material payoffs.
Right.
But that's all that matters to most of society. If it's not in the bank or on a piece of paper, it's not worth anything.
Exactly. Yeah, I learned a long time ago, I don't get excited until the check clears the bank.
Yeah. And, the thing is that sometimes when it's all said and done, you may not come out ahead in terms of financial payoff. But there's other kinds of payoff, too, and sometimes
Right.
that is important.
Right.
So, yeah. That's just, the way it goes some days. Maybe someday I'll see financial payoff. Am I holding my breath for it? Nope.
Right.
Nope. Yeah.
Well, that's why, I'm still called a conspiracy theorist. But that's okay, because I was called a conspiracy theorist back in the 70s and 60s even, when I tried to tell people that there was a conspiracy behind the Kennedy assassination. Most people now understand that's true. I was called a conspiracy theorist when I said Nixon's a crook, he won't last out his term. I turned out I was correct. I was a conspiracy theorist when I told everybody Vietnam is not going to end well because they're already telling us we're not going to win over there, so what are we doing? By the way, Iraq, Afghanistan, same thing, but nobody seems to figure out that we can do what we did in Vietnam, which is just say, declare victory, okay, we won, and leave. All right, well, we can't do that, so, we're just going to hang in there and lose more people. But I was just a conspiracy theorist. 9/11, just a conspiracy theorist, and yet it's in your face. So I've gotten pretty hard-shelled about it. They say, you're a conspiracy theorist, and yeah, okay. except I'm really not, okay? I'm a conspiracy factualist. I only deal with facts, not with government pronouncements, which have been proven so wrong in the past.
Well, there's been a lot of theories about a lot of stuff in the Middle East here lately, one of which we have not, all the times that we've planned on bringing it up as a topic, we've skipped over it. And you had some stuff about Egyptology.
Oh, well, yeah. I made a very, very fascinating trip to Egypt back first this year. And it was really quite interesting. There, of course, has always been this big squabble about who built the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and the Egyptologists, of course, tell you that 5,000 years ago, and it was the Egyptians, the great Egyptian empire, and they had all these slaves dragging rocks through the desert, and they would put them up ramps or haul them by elephants or lift them with water or who God knows how. They've tried in many different ways. Nobody's absolutely proven how they were able to accomplish all this incredible monument. The Great Pyramid, of course, is the last of the 8 wonders of the world that's still in existence, and they're still arguing over its origin. But the geologists tell us, well, yeah, but now there's definite vertical water erosion on the Sphinx, sides of the Sphinx, and on the ground around it, and also some on the Great Pyramid. And we know geologically that there has not been any significant rainfall on the Giza Plateau for more than 10,500 years. So that means that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx were existing more than 10,500 years ago. Of course, this would leave the Egyptians out of the equation, so the Egyptologists refused to buy into that. And so, I was well aware of all this squabble, and so I was real interested to go over there. And I am now unalterably convinced that the Egyptians did not build the Great Pyramid or the Sphinx. Now, they built some copycat pyramids, and you can tell them they're real small and they're kind of crumbling and kind of leaning over. Okay, but this gives evidence that there was a very highly technologically advanced civilization on this planet long before the Egyptians, and I mean long before. And of course, if you have kept up with the work of Zecharia Sitchin, and you know about the Sumerian tablets that predate the Egyptians by several thousand years, then you realize that they write about this and they tell us what was going on. But of course, most people hadn't heard about this, and the mass media ignores it like there's nothing going on. And to me, it's a huge mystery and just a incredible, point to ponder. But for instance, the Great Pyramid, one of the things I noticed is that we went to all these temples and palaces, and the Egyptians, as you might well know, were kind of like the Romans, kind of like the Nazis. They wrote down everything. I mean, they detailed how much crops came in and who sold what and who was ruling and who was his sons and daughters and who died. I mean, everything's written down in their hieroglyphics.
Uh-huh.
And yet you go in the Great Pyramid, there's no hieroglyphics in there. That was not a tomb. That was not anything that having to do with the Egyptians, or they would have covered it with hieroglyphics. It's just not in there. Personally, I think that the British engineer, Christopher Dunn, is probably correct. He wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant. He said the Great Pyramid has all the evidence of being a power generator, picking up the episodic energy from the earth, channeling it, resonating it, boosting it, and oscillating it, and then sending it out to satellite places, perhaps all around the world. And that makes a lot of sense, and it certainly jives with what I saw. Also, we went to Seti's temple, which is really interesting. That's the place, by the way, where up high on one wall there are these hieroglyphics, and I swear I don't know what this means, but they've got some stuff carved up there that can only be described as an Apache helicopter, and an airplane and maybe a submarine. It's like, what is this doing carved into this, 4,000-year-old Egyptian temple? But you know what? Here's an interesting thought that I've had, having produced a book about the Army's remote viewing program. And Gia, you do know at least what I'm talking about when I mention remote viewing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, for those of your listeners who might not, this was psychic ability that was taught to Army personnel back in the 70s and 80s, 90s, early 90s. And they would train them to use this psychic ability, what we used to call clairvoyance, which is seeing with your mind. And you throw your mind at far distant locations and get images and perceptions. And they trained them to harness this and to use it operationally. And they were using it to spy on our enemies, look for, new type of aircraft, look for submarines, look for biochemical warfare plants, things like that. And according to people who participated, and I've talked to maybe not all of them, but pretty much all of them, and they all agree that it really does work. It can work. It does work. So this is something that the CIA was developing and then the Army was using operationally. So we're not talking about just some New Age woo-woo theories here. It actually works. So in trying to grasp how these Egyptians could come up with these images that can only be described as a helicopter, an airplane, a submarine, it's like a lot of people say, well, maybe that's the proof that they were very technologically advanced and they had such things. But I don't think so, because if they had something like that, it would seem like that we would have found remains of those things somewhere, because some of those temples and some of those things, we in the Egyptian Museum, there's little bitty statuettes and lamps, tables, chairs that are, 3,000, 4,000 years old, and there they are. They're still there. So if they had a helicopter or submarine, why wouldn't it still be there, at least portions of it? So I suddenly dawned on me, and I'll see what you think about this, Gia. We know the Egyptians were very spiritual and thought in spiritual ways. They're always thinking about the afterlife and thinking about the gods and had all these various things. So what if they developed what we would now call remote viewing? What if they had the psychic ability to look forward and backwards in time, and they came forward in time and psychically viewed a submarine and a helicopter and an airplane, and then carved that into their sides of their temple there as something they saw? Perhaps that's an explanation of why those very odd symbols are there.
Uh-huh. Maybe so.
But back to the whole idea of a pre-Egyptian civilization, behind Seti's temple and buried way down underground, way below it, which means it was there a long time before the Pharaoh Seti built his temple, is what they call the Osirian. And it is huge, massive stone blocks that are stacked on top of each other with cross pieces and look very reminiscent of Stonehenge, except Stonehenge are just rough stones placed in their circular positions, while the Osirian are these extremely squared-off rectangular blocks that are not even mortared. They just fit so perfectly, they just fit right up next to each other into place, and you can't even slide a piece of paper in between there. Now, that takes engineering and skill that I'm not even sure we possess today. And who built that? Well, we don't know. But interestingly enough, this is used, the Osirian usually is underwater. We were there on a very unusual day when the water had drained. They had had an exceptionally dry winter, and we actually were able to get down in there and look around, and then we were chased off by the guards because the Egyptian authorities really don't want anybody going back there and down in there, because you can't help but wonder, well, who built this thing? Because it obviously wasn't the Egyptians. There's no hieroglyphics on it. It's totally different from construction than the temples and the palaces we saw of the Egyptians. So there's a lot going on with ancient Egypt that we're not being told about.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I heard a rumor, too, that there is something supposedly under the Sphinx.
Well,
and that the Egyptian authorities don't allow any investigation at all.
That's right. In fact, it's interesting. I was trying to get something going there while I was over there because I'd gotten word from some people I'd met who said that they had actually been in the tunnel system that exists under the Giza Plateau and connects, they just kind of go all over the place. And by some reports, it actually connects you to the legendary Hall of Records, which is supposedly located in a room under the left paw of the Sphinx. But, of course, I never could get that working. I couldn't find anybody to help. I'm just one guy. I was doing good to be over there. I certainly didn't have the funds to mount an expedition. Plus, as you say so correctly, the Egyptian authorities, particularly in the antiquities area, they have built a wall around the Giza Plateau. They don't let people wander around. You can't go look at that stuff. You can't go find out anything. But interestingly enough, after I got back here just a month or so ago, there was a story on the Internet where some scientist claims that he had found some passageways and that he was saying that there was a huge tunnel complex under the Giza Plateau. The very thing I've been told, the very thing I have talked to people who said they had been down in this thing. And, of course, immediately the Egyptian authorities were going, no, he's mistaken and there's nothing there. And that story kind of disappeared and hadn't heard any more about it. But, again, there's a lot more going on over there than we've been told. And I think it has to do with these ancient civilizations that predate the Egyptian civilization. And, again, going back to the Sumerian tablets, on several occasions, not just once, so it wasn't just a story, they tell about the Anunnaki, which translates into those who came from the heavens and landed on the earth. And so I think that what we would find here is evidence of an extraterrestrial presence on the earth thousands of years before the Egyptian civilization. But, of course, we don't get taught that in school, and CNN and Fox doesn't talk about that, so it can't be real, so never mind, we'll just talk about something else.
Yeah, which leads us all back to the persistent claim made by some that humans have been genetically modified by extraterrestrials.
Right. Now, let's talk about that for a half second, because people have a big problem with that, particularly Christian fundamentalists. They say, no, God created us. We weren't created by aliens. And, Jim, they're right. Okay, we weren't created by aliens. But if you read the Sumerian tablets, and by the way, this isn't just some conspiracy theory or some theory of Zachariah Sitchin's. If you want to read the story of the ancient Sumerian gods and the Anunnaki, you can go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, okay? It tells the whole story. The only problem is it just doesn't say this is history. It says this is their mythology. In other words, this is just stuff they made up. Well, the only difference is between Sitchin and a growing number of other scholars is not that they are translating things different. The translators all pretty much agree. It's just in the interpretation. Where the Encyclopedia Britannica says, well, that's just their mythology, this growing number of scientists and translators are saying, well, I don't think this was just their mythology. I think they were telling us what they knew to be true or what they believed to be true. And if you'll read what's in the Sumerian tablets, which there's thousands of them in existence and only about 20% of them have been translated, you'll find that the story is that these ETs landed on the planet and were basically trying to get gold out of the Persian Gulf, but they couldn't get very much. As anybody who's tried to pan for gold will tell you, that trying to get gold out of water is a long, slow, difficult process, and it doesn't yield very much. So they began to mine for gold. But this was laborious work, and these astronauts, they rebelled. And I said, this is tough. I signed up to be an astronaut, not a gold miner. And there were some strikes, some slowdowns. They were having a problem with this. So their chief science officer, Inky, says, well, I have a solution. He said, I've been studying these primitive Earth creatures down in my laboratory in the Abzug, which has been translated as Africa. And he said, I think that we can genetically manipulate their DNA and we can improve the breed. Okay? So they even describe how they did this. They took the egg of a Earth female primitive, shall we call her Lucy, and they impregnated it with the sperm of an Anunnaki male, and then this was implanted in the ovaries of a Anunnaki female, and it grew into a fetus and grew into a baby, and they delivered it via cesarean section and produced what they call the Adama, interestingly enough, the Adam, the first Earthman. And so they didn't create anything. They just simply improved the breed, just like we do with horses and cows and sheep and dogs and cats. We haven't created any of those, but we certainly, through selective breeding, and now through in vitro fertilization and through cloning and through genetic manipulation, now we are improving the breed. So this also could answer one of the big mysteries in science, which is where's the missing link? You know, we know about Neanderthal, and then we know about Cro-Magnon, which is modern man, but they have yet to come up convincingly with a linking those two. And yet we now know from studying the mitochondria DNA that they were separate races. In fact, it's been fairly well established that the reason that there was not any interbreeding between the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon is because they couldn't, okay? They were not the same species. So what happened there, and why, if it was natural evolution, why isn't there a record of the links between those two? Well, this answers it, because there was no links. The Anunnaki tweaked with Neanderthal DNA and improved the breed to Cro-Magnon. Modern
well,
man.
you know, when you look at evolution, okay, now, you know, I can understand that we started off as a chimpanzee-like entity and gradually evolved into what we are.
Right.
That's very possible. But when you look at the ancestors of a horse or a dog, which, you know, the dog shares with raccoons and bears as well, okay, that ancestor's gone. Okay, there is no primitive version of the dog or wolf or bear.
There's wolves and there's all kinds of.
Well, I'm talking
like
about
that.
going back.
But look here's what you're saying, and I agree, is that you know, even the most fundamentalist Christian would agree that the flower that's in your flower bed was created by God. You know, okay, I think we could all agree to that. And yet, it didn't wake up one morning, there it was. It grew from a seed and into a seedling, and then, you know, it evolved into what it is today. And I think likewise, the animal, plant life on this planet, regardless of what you want to believe as the initiating creative force, nevertheless went through a series of evolution and over millions of years evolved into different entities.
Yeah, and well, you know, that distant ancestor doesn't exist anymore. Okay,
right.
They have fossil evidence of it. So if we came from chimpanzees, why are there still chimpanzees? Why aren't we an exception to the rule?
Well, because again, if you think of just natural selection and natural evolution, then that is a very real question. How come some evolved into modern human beings and some are still chimpanzees? But if you adhere to the idea that these ancient spacefarers, these Anunnaki, tweaked with the DNA of certain primates and improve the breed to where they evolved into a modern man, then it answers your question. Some of them were tweaked and some of them were not. And some of those ancient primitives that didn't get the DNA tweaking remained in the animal state.
Yeah.
See, that answers that if that's true. And I'm not even trying to say that's true. I'm offering up some theories and some theses that a lot of people, increasing number of people are going, but it's based on some fairly compelling evidence. I guess the only thing I can say for sure is that the true history of this planet is probably not at all what we were taught in school.
Yeah, well, what we were taught in school doesn't have much to do with history that you're taught in college. I found that absolutely mind-boggling.
Right.
I was taught about a whole different world when I went to college versus when I was in high school and junior high.
Amen. Now, the problem is, once you get out of college and you got that sheepskin, you go, wow, I got a college education. Now I know everything, and most people stop, okay? And what they were taught in college, that's all they know, and they stand by it, by golly, because that's what I was taught in college. But if you're like me, and you continue to read and study, you're going to find that you're going to go out and you're going to find that what you find out through your own research, reading, and study is totally different from what you were taught in college, which was totally different from what you were taught in public school.
Well, I can't say that I got a cohesive look at history from college.
No, but it put you on the track. It put you on the right track.
Well, at least it taught me that history, things happen for a reason. And the reason is what makes things much, much more interesting. And the reasons boil down to history is made by people like you and me who are doing what they believe in for whatever reason that they're doing it. And those reasons, usually boil down to greed and power, to be honest.
Yeah.
That seems to be the big motivators. Greed, power, well, religion throws in every now and again, too. But it's still motivated by greed and power.
But if you go back and study the history of organized religion, it's basically about greed and power.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with you there.
And you know what? Now, since you touched on that, I don't know. I hate to get on my soapbox here, but most of what we think we know is simply not true. And if you'll think back, I hear people all the time ask me, but I'm just one person. What can I do? As if they're powerless, okay? Well, folks, let me tell you something. In the whole history of the world, there's nothing good ever come out of a committee, okay, or a gang, or a mob, or a crowd, okay? History, all of history, generally, has been made by individual people, okay? Whether it's Martin Luther,
yep.
Whether it's Jesus Christ, Gandhi, Hitler, Mao Tse-tung,
and you know what else?
You name it. You just go down a list. It's individuals who have changed history. It's individuals who've created empires or destroyed empires.
People don't make history by conforming.
No, you don't. And everyone who's changed history had to fight to do it, The Wright brothers, we're taught in school, well, they flew at Kitty Hawk in 1906, and that was the advent of man-made powered flight. What they don't get taught is that the New York Times, which was just, a stone's throw from Kitty Hawk, refused to even run the story of their flight for more than a year because their hidebound editors didn't believe man could fly. And they said, it's a conspiracy theory. No, I'm not going to listen to those wild and crazy tales. And it was only after the French, who were already experimenting with flight and were very impressed with what the Wright brothers did, and took them over to Europe, and they demonstrated their flying machine over there, and the European media finally jumped all over it and said, man, look what these guys have done. They've got powered flight. And it was more than a year after they flew before the New York Times finally grudgingly ran a little story and said, well, I guess they flew in this flying machine. See, it's people making things happen, not the establishment, not the status quo. So when, I don't know, I guess maybe I learned this at my mother's knee or something. I'd come home from grade school and say, Mom, I want one of these, or I want to do this. And she'd say, why do you want to do this? And I'd say, well, because all the other kids are doing it. And her stock answer was, well, if all the other kids go fling themselves off a cliff, are you going to go with them? Just because everybody's doing something doesn't mean it's right.
Nope. My mother changed the phrase to jump off a bridge. Okay.
Okay. All right. Different parts of the country, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, are they all going to jump off a bridge? Are you going to follow them there too?
Exactly. I guess that's what I learned early on.
That's not the mindset that's being encouraged.
No, today it's conform.
Oh yeah, I remember going to school with my kids. Now my daughter's just turned 27. But going to school with kids and, having a consultation with a school psychologist who announced in this very, I guess snooty is the best way to put it.
Sanctimonious.
Yeah.
Sanctimonious.
That my children were independent thinkers, like they had a social disease. And
yeah, like there's something wrong with that.
And apparently you are, too. And I'm thinking, well, aren't we supposed to be? Isn't this a desirable characteristic? No, it's not. It was a bad thing. And,
Well, I'm just hoping that at that time they didn't suggest that your children take psychiatric drugs for attention deficit disorder.
Oh, yeah, Ritalin. Yes, Ritalin. At the same time, we did the Battle of Ritalin. And you want to have seen the doctor's face when I told him, well, I'm thinking about, because this is my son who was the younger of the two, I said, I'm thinking about putting him on it for a month, but not because I think it's the best thing for him, but because I'm a little tired and maybe I need a break to come at this again. And then he looked at me so funny. I did ultimately choose not to do so.
Good.
But I didn't think that the Ritalin was the best thing for him. He was just going to tone him down for the people around him. But I saw no reason to use drugs to make him...
No. And unfortunately, though, that's where we are today. There's too many parents who say they get a lively kid who's really bright and really thinking, whether it's a boy or a girl, and they're kind of self-assured and self-motivated, and they can cause some trouble. They can be a real handful. And unfortunately, today, there's too many parents that go, oh, man, I just don't want to put up with this. So when the school nurse sends them to the psychologist and or the psychiatrist, and they say, well, let's put them on these drugs to calm them down, they're all for it. Little realizing that these drugs, well, for example, Prozac, one of the most abused of the prescribed psychiatric drugs, primarily prescribed for attention deficit disorder and depression, is fluoroxide, okay? It's 94% fluoride. And fluoride used to be used as a rat poison because it depresses your central nervous system. Are they calmed down? Yes, sure. They're zombified, okay? Stumble around with a smile on their face, everything's okay. And you get on those things, and now, thank God, they're finally at least making them, these manufacturers, to put these warning labels on there that says could lead to suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts, brain deterioration. And fluoride, for example, is aggregates in your system. It grows, okay? So, if you're on it for a few years, you just add more and more and more, and you're probably never going to be the same person. And people don't understand this, and they don't understand this because the major mass media will not talk about it. Let me tell you something. One of the things that really concerns people are these school shootings, right? Who wants to send their kid to school thinking there's a chance that some idiot's going to show up with a gun and start opening up on everybody? Okay? But now let me tell you something. Back in the 40s and 50s, when I was in school, and I was in school in Texas, and not as kindergartners, but in about high school, we'd take guns to school. We had guns in the gun racks of pickup trucks. Sometimes we'd take it into school. Hey, look what I got. Look at my new rifle, blah, 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 whatever. Nobody ever shot anybody. It's not about the guns. It's about the psychotropic drugs, all right? But how come we're not being told about that? Every single one of almost every single one, the only reason I can't say every single one of the school shooters was on psychiatric drugs is because some of them, like Cho from Virginia Tech, they've sealed his medical records. So we can't tell what he was on. But it was reported in the first few days of the Virginia Tech shooting that he was under psychiatric care and that he was on psychiatric treatment, which means he was on psychiatric drugs. But
well, Jim, hang on. We've run out of time again.
Okay,
it happens
well, that's
every
it. It's the drugs.
time.
Don't take the drugs.
Yep, stay out of the drugs.
Just say no.
Yep. Well, Jim, I want to thank you for coming on tonight and being such a fantastic guest. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I hope all of the audience has as well as having found that it provided you plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal journey towards truth. Join us again next week as we bring you Giorgio Tsoukalos, official representative Eric von Däniken in the United States and co-author of History is Wrong, and another fascinating episode of The Dawn of Shades. With that, we are out of time. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.